The sound that shattered the silence wasn't a scream. It was something far worse. It was the wet, choking gasp of someone drowning in air, followed by the horrifying thud of a body hitting marble. In the span of 3 seconds, Victoria Sterling went from commanding a room full of Philadelphia's most powerful executives to lying motionless on the polished conference table of Sterling Industries' 42nd floor boardroom. Her $3,000 suit was perfectly pressed, her silver hair still immaculate in its professional chignon, but her lips were already shifting from pink to an ominous shade of blue. 11 people in designer suits stood frozen around that table like expensive mannequins. 11 people who collectively controlled billions in assets, who made decisions that affected thousands of lives daily, who prided themselves on handling any crisis with ruthless efficiency, and not one of them moved. The grandfather clock in the corner ticked once, twice, 3 times. "Someone call 911, whispered James Morton, the chief financial officer, but his voice came out as barely a croak. His hands shook as he fumbled for his phone, his manicured fingers suddenly clumsy and useless. Is she breathing?" stammered Rebecca Nash, the head of legal, her usual commanding presence reduced to a frightened whisper. Victoria Sterling wasn't breathing. Her chest lay still as stone, her face growing grayer with each passing second. The woman who had built a pharmaceutical empire from nothing, who had stared down hostile takeovers and congressional hearings without flinching, was dying in front of them, and they could only watch. That's when the boardroom door burst open. Marcus Rivera had been mopping the executive hallway when he heard the commotion. Not the usual sounds of heated business discussions, but something raw and panicked that made his military instincts snap to attention. He'd pushed through that door without thinking, without permission, his janitor's cart forgotten in the hallway behind him. Now he stood in the most exclusive room in the building, water still dripping from his industrial mop, onto Persian rugs worth more than his annual salary. His Navy maintenance uniform was a stark contrast to the sea of black suits, his calloused hands so different from their soft, manicured ones. But Marcus Rivera wasn't seeing the luxury around him. He wasn't thinking about how he didn't belong in this room. He was seeing a woman in cardiac arrest, and his combat medic training was already taking over. "How long has she been down?" he barked, his voice cutting through their paralysis as he dropped to his knees beside the table. "What are you doing here?" James Morton's shock turned to indignation. "Security! Get this man out of—" "How long?" Marcus repeated, his fingers already moving to Victoria's neck, searching for a pulse that wasn't there. His voice carried the kind of authority that came from battlefield experience, from moments when hesitation meant death. 2, maybe 3 minutes, Rebecca Nash stammered, something in Marcus's commanding presence cutting through her confusion. 3 minutes. In Marcus's world, the world of combat medicine and emergency response, that was a lifetime. But it wasn't too late. Not yet. If you're enjoying this story so far, don't forget to hit the like button and subscribe. Drop a comment telling me where in the world you're watching from. I love hearing from you. Marcus's hands moved with practiced precision, tilting Victoria's head back and checking her airway. Clear. He placed 2 fingers on her sternum, positioned his other hand on top, and began compressions. 1, 2, 3, the rhythm as familiar to him as breathing. "What are you doing to her?" Morton's voice rose to a shriek. "Get your hands off Ms. Sterling." But Marcus didn't stop, couldn't stop, because 20 years ago in a dusty field hospital outside Kandahar, he'd learned that the only thing worse than failing to save someone was not trying at all. The executives watched in horror and fascination as this stranger, this janitor, fought for their CEO's life with a skill and intensity none of them possessed. His compressions were deep and steady, his count unwavering, his focus absolute. 15 compressions. Marcus tilted Victoria's head back, pinched her nose, and breathed into her lungs. Once, twice. Her chest rose and fell with his breath, but there was still no heartbeat, still no response. "Someone get me the AED," he commanded without looking up, continuing the compressions. "The what?" Morton asked, bewildered. "Automated external defibrillator. Every floor should have one. Red box, usually near the elevators." Rebecca Nash surprised herself by running towards the door, her heels clicking frantically on the marble. She'd never used emergency equipment in her life, but something about Marcus's calm competence made her trust him completely. The seconds stretched like hours. Marcus worked with mechanical precision. 30 compressions, 2 breaths. 30 compressions, 2 breaths, while the most powerful people in Philadelphia stood helplessly around him. His maintenance uniform was soaked with sweat, his graying hair disheveled, but his hands never wavered. "Got it!" Rebecca burst back through the door, dragging a red case behind her. Marcus opened it without missing a beat in his compressions, his muscle memory taking over. He'd used these devices in combat zones, in field hospitals, in situations far more chaotic than this pristine boardroom. "Clear!" he called out, though no one was close enough to touch Victoria. The machine analyzed her heart rhythm, its electronic voice eerily calm in the tense silence. "Shock advised. Charging." The high-pitched whine of the defibrillator filled the room. Marcus placed the pads on Victoria's chest with practiced accuracy, then looked up to make sure everyone was back. "Clear," he said again, his finger hovering over the button. The shock made Victoria's body arch off the table, a grotesque puppet dance that made several executives turn away. The defibrillator immediately began analyzing again. Marcus resumed compressions, his jaw set with determination. He'd been in this position before, fighting death in austere conditions with limited resources, but this wasn't a battlefield. This was supposed to be the safe, civilized world of corporate America. Except death didn't care about quarterly reports or stock prices. Death was the same everywhere, relentless, impatient, and utterly indifferent to wealth or status. "Come on," Marcus murmured under his breath as he worked. "Come on, Victoria, fight." It was the first time anyone in that room had heard their CEO called by her first name in years. But somehow, in that moment, it felt right. She wasn't the powerful head of Sterling Industries anymore. She was just a human being whose heart had stopped beating, whose life hung in the balance of a janitor's skilled hands. The second shock came at the 4-minute mark, then the third. Marcus never stopped, never slowed, his training overriding the growing exhaustion in his arms. The executives had gone silent, their earlier protests forgotten as they watched this stranger pour everything he had into saving their leader. And then, on the 4th round of compressions, something changed. Victoria's chest rose on its own, a shallow, gasping breath that made everyone in the room hold theirs in response. Her eyelids fluttered, a weak cough escaped her lips. The defibrillator's monotone voice announced what they could all see. Normal rhythm detected. Marcus sat back on his heels, his hands shaking slightly as the adrenaline began to fade. Victoria Sterling was breathing. Her color was returning. Her eyes were beginning to focus. She was alive. The silence in the boardroom was deafening. 11 of the city's most influential people stared at a janitor who had just performed a miracle with nothing but his hands and his knowledge. A man they had never truly seen before, whose name they didn't even know, had done what none of them could do, had saved the life they all depended on. Victoria's eyes found Marcus first, confusion and gratitude mixing in her gaze. She tried to speak, but only managed a weak whisper. "Thank you." Marcus nodded, professional even in this moment of triumph. "Paramedics should be here soon. Try not to move too much." As if summoned by his words, the distant wail of sirens began to echo through the building's canyon of glass and steel. Help was coming, official help, with proper equipment and credentials and authority. But Marcus Rivera, a man who cleaned floors and emptied trash cans for minimum wage plus benefits, had already done the impossible. He had brought Victoria Sterling back from the dead. As the paramedics burst through the boardroom door with their stretcher and advanced equipment, as they took over Victoria's care with practiced efficiency, Marcus quietly gathered himself to leave. His job here was done. The professionals could handle it from here. But as he reached for the door, Rebecca Nash's voice stopped him. "Wait," she said, her voice still shaky with emotion. "What's your name?" Marcus paused, his hand on the ornate brass handle. "Marcus Rivera, building maintenance." "Mr. Rivera," she said formally, though her eyes were bright with unshed tears, I think we owe you more than we can ever repay." Marcus looked back at Victoria, now conscious and alert, as the paramedics prepared to transport her. Their eyes met across the room, janitor and CEO, separated by every possible barrier except the most important one, their shared humanity. "No payment necessary," Marcus said quietly. "Just glad I could help." And with that, he walked out of the boardroom and back into the world of service elevators and supply closets, leaving behind a room full of powerful people who would never see their building or themselves quite the same way again. But Marcus Rivera had no idea that his act of heroism was about to set in motion a chain of events that would transform not just Victoria Sterling's life, but his own. Because sometimes when you save someone's life, they save yours right back. The ambulance disappeared into Philadelphia traffic, carrying Victoria Sterling towards the best cardiac care money could buy. In the boardroom, executives slowly filed out, each lost in their own thoughts about what they had witnessed. And 42 floors below, Marcus Rivera returned to his mop and bucket, his uniform still damp with sweat, his hands still trembling slightly from the adrenaline. He had 17 more floors to clean before his shift ended, and a 7-year-old daughter waiting for him at home. He had no way of knowing that his life was about to change forever. But Marcus Rivera had no idea that his life was about to change forever, because 3 hours later, as he sat in the cramped break room, eating a peanut butter sandwich from home and scrolling through job listings on his phone, his supervisor knocked on the door with an expression Marcus had never seen before. "Rivera," Tom Hendricks said, his usual gruff demeanor replaced by something that looked almost like awe. "You need to come with me, now." Marcus looked up from his phone, where he'd been circling potential second jobs. The rent was going up again next month, and Sophia's after-school program cost more than he'd budgeted for. "What's wrong? Did I mess up the 42nd floor? I know I left early, but—" "Just come," Tom interrupted, holding the door open, "and bring your things." The elevator ride to the top floor felt endless. Marcus had never been to the 45th floor, executive territory where the real decisions got made. His maintenance access card didn't even work up there. As the numbers climbed, his stomach dropped. This had to be about the boardroom incident. He'd overstepped, broken protocol, entered a restricted area without permission. They were going to fire him. The thought hit him like a physical blow. This job wasn't much, minimum wage with basic benefits, but it was steady. It paid for Sophia's school supplies and the small apartment they called home. It kept the lights on and food on the table. At 47 years old, with a 7-year-old daughter depending on him, Marcus couldn't afford to start over. The elevator doors opened to reveal a world he'd only glimpsed through service entrances and supply deliveries. Marble floors polished to mirror brightness, original artwork on the walls, floor-to-ceiling windows offering a god's-eye view of Philadelphia stretching to the horizon. Even the air felt different up here, cleaner, somehow more expensive. Tom led him down a hushed hallway to a reception area larger than Marcus's entire apartment. Behind a desk that probably cost more than Marcus made in 6 months sat a woman with silver hair and kind eyes, wearing a dress that screamed designer but somehow didn't look pretentious on her. "Mr. Rivera," she said, standing as they approached. "I'm Eleanor Hayes, Ms. Sterling's executive assistant. She's been asking for you." Marcus's throat went dry. Is she okay?" Eleanor's face softened. "She's fine, thanks to you. She's resting at Presbyterian Hospital, but she insisted on speaking with you as soon as possible. She wanted me to give you this." She handed him a cream-colored envelope with his name written in elegant script across the front. Marcus's hand shook slightly as he opened it. "Mr. Rivera, I am told that you saved my life today. While I have limited memory of the incident itself, I will never forget waking up to see your concerned face above mine. I understand that you acted without hesitation, with skill that should not have surprised anyone but did, and with a compassion that seems to be increasingly rare in this world. I would very much like to thank you in person, and to discuss something that I hope will interest you. Would you be willing to visit me at the hospital this evening? Eleanor can arrange transportation if needed." With profound gratitude, Victoria Sterling Marcus read the note twice, then looked up at Eleanor, who was watching him with an expression he couldn't quite decipher. "She really wants to see me?" he asked. "Mr. Rivera," Eleanor said gently, "you pulled her back from death. Of course she wants to see you." Tom Hendricks shifted uncomfortably beside him. "Look, Rivera, I don't know what this is about, but your shift isn't over. You've got 3 more floors to finish before—" "Actually," Eleanor interrupted smoothly, "Ms. Sterling has given Mr. Rivera the rest of the day off with pay, and tomorrow as well, if needed." Tom's mouth opened and closed like a fish gasping for air. In 23 years of working for Sterling Industries, he'd never seen a janitor get personal attention from the CEO. Hell, he'd never seen Victoria Sterling acknowledge that janitors existed at all. "I'll need to check with my daughter," Marcus said quietly. "Make sure she's okay staying late at the after-school program." "Of course," Eleanor smiled. "Take all the time you need. When you're ready, there's a car waiting downstairs to take you to the hospital." A car? Marcus had taken exactly 3 car rides in the past 5 years, all to the emergency room when Sophia had pneumonia last winter. He walked everywhere else or took the bus. The idea of a private car seemed as foreign as flying to the moon. "Ma'am," he said carefully, "I appreciate the offer, but I can take the bus. It's only Mr. Rivera." Eleanor's voice was firm but kind. "After what you did today, the least we can do is make sure you get to the hospital safely and comfortably. Please, let us do this small thing." An hour later, Marcus sat in the back of a black sedan that probably cost more than he'd made in his entire adult life, watching Philadelphia pass by through tinted windows. The driver, a polite man in his 50s named Robert, had offered him water, had asked about the temperature, had treated him with a respect that Marcus wasn't used to receiving from anyone connected to Sterling Industries. "First time visiting Presbyterian?" Robert asked, glancing in the rearview mirror. "No," Marcus said quietly. "My daughter was born there, and when she had pneumonia last year—" He trailed off, not sure why he was sharing personal details with a stranger. "Good hospital," Robert said. "Ms. Sterling's in the VIP wing on the 8th floor. Best cardiac care in the city." The VIP wing. Marcus had walked past its entrance once when Sophia was getting X-rays, had glimpsed the marble lobby and fresh flowers through glass doors that might as well have been marked "No poor people allowed." He'd never imagined he'd have reason to go inside. Presbyterian Hospital's VIP wing was like entering a high-end hotel. Soft lighting, comfortable seating areas, artwork that looked original rather than mass-produced. A young woman at the reception desk smiled warmly when he gave his name. "Mr. Rivera, yes, Ms. Sterling is expecting you. Room 815. The elevators are just down the hall." Room 815 was actually a suite with a sitting area and floor-to-ceiling windows overlooking the city. Victoria Sterling sat in a chair by the window, no longer wearing the power suit from the boardroom, but a simple hospital gown and robe. She looked smaller somehow, more human. An IV drip was attached to her arm, and monitors beeped softly in the background, but her color was good and her eyes were alert. She smiled when she saw him, a real smile, not the polished corporate expression he'd seen in company newsletters. "Mr. Rivera, please come in. Sit down." Marcus perched awkwardly on the edge of a chair that probably cost more than his monthly rent. "How are you feeling, ma'am?" "Alive," she said simply, "which I'm told is entirely thanks to you. The doctors say another minute or two." She shook her head. "Well, let's just say I owe you everything." "Anyone would have done the same thing," Marcus said quietly. Victoria's eyebrows rose. "Would they? Because from what I remember, there were 11 other people in that room, and not one of them moved to help." "You did." "Why?" Marcus was quiet for a long moment, thinking. "My daughter," he said finally. "Sophia. She's 7. And I guess I kept thinking about how I'd want someone to help her if she needed it. How I'd want someone to try." Victoria's expression softened. "Tell me about her." For the next 20 minutes, Marcus found himself talking about Sophia in a way he rarely did with anyone. About how smart she was, how she wanted to be a scientist when she grew up, how she read everything she could get her hands on, about how proud she was that her daddy worked in the biggest building in the city, even though she didn't really understand what he did there. Victoria listened intently, asking questions, genuinely interested in this glimpse into a world so different from her own. "She sounds wonderful," Victoria said when Marcus finished, "and you're raising her alone." "Her mother left when Sophia was 2, Marcus said simply. "Decided she wasn't cut out for parenthood. So yeah, it's just us." "That can't be easy," Marcus shrugged. "We manage. Sophia's worth every sacrifice." Victoria was quiet for a moment, studying his face. "Eleanor tells me you've been with the company for 8 years. Building maintenance, night shift." "Yes, ma'am." "And before that?" Marcus hesitated. He didn't usually talk about his past, especially not with people like Victoria Sterling. "I was in the Army, combat medic, did 2 tours overseas." "That explains the CPR skills. You knew exactly what to do. Once you learn it, you don't forget." Victoria leaned forward slightly. "Marcus, may I call you Marcus? What I'm about to say might sound strange, but I need you to hear me out." Marcus nodded, not trusting his voice. "I've spent the last 30 years building Sterling Industries into what it is today. We employ over 15,000 people. Our pharmaceuticals help millions of patients worldwide, and we're worth billions on paper. But until today, I had never once stopped to think about the people who keep the lights on in my building, the people who make it possible for me to do what I do." She paused, looking out the window at the city lights beginning to twinkle in the gathering dusk. "Watching you work on me today, seeing your skill and your compassion, made me realize something. I've been so focused on the big picture that I've completely lost sight of the individuals who make it all possible. People like you who come in every night and make sure our world is clean and safe and ready for the next day." Marcus didn't know what to say to that, so he stayed quiet. "I want to make you an offer," Victoria continued. "And before you say anything, I want you to know that this isn't charity. This isn't me throwing money at you out of guilt. This is about recognizing talent and potential that has been overlooked. She reached for a folder on the side table and handed it to him. I'm creating a new position at Sterling Industries, Head of Employee Safety and Wellness. The job would involve developing emergency response protocols, training staff in basic life-saving techniques, and ensuring that every employee, from the CEO down to the newest hire, has access to the resources they need to stay safe and healthy. Marcus opened the folder with trembling hands. The salary figure at the top of the page made him blink hard. It was more than 4 times what he currently made. There were benefits listed: health insurance, dental, vision, life insurance, retirement contributions, things he'd only dreamed of being able to afford. "Ma'am," he said, his voice barely a whisper, "I don't have the qualifications for something like this. I never finished college. I don't have any business experience." "You have something more valuable than a college degree," Victoria interrupted. "You have real-world experience in keeping people alive under pressure. You have compassion. You have integrity. And you have the respect of every person who was in that boardroom today, even if they don't fully understand why yet." Marcus stared at the paper in his hands, afraid to believe what he was seeing. "Think about it," Victoria said gently. "Think about what this could mean for Sophia. Think about the life you could build for her. Think about all the people you could help." "Why?" Marcus asked, looking up at her. "Why would you do this for me?" Victoria smiled, and for a moment she looked nothing like the powerful CEO who commanded boardrooms and made million-dollar decisions. She looked like what she was, a woman who had been given a second chance at life. "Because you saved me," she said simply, "and now I want to save you back." Marcus sat in the break room of his apartment building at 5:47 a.m. The folder from Victoria Sterling spread across the scratched formica table like a map to a different life. He'd been staring at the papers for 3 hours ever since Sophia had fallen asleep, and he'd finally had a quiet moment to process what had happened. The salary figure hadn't changed. Neither had the benefits package, the job description, or the reality that Victoria Sterling, a woman worth more than the GDP of some small countries, wanted to give him a chance he'd never dared to dream of. His phone buzzed, a text from his neighbor, Mrs. Chen, who watched Sophia most mornings when his shift ran late. "Saw the news? Is that really you?" Marcus frowned, opening his laptop, a 5-year-old machine he'd bought second-hand when Sophia started school. A quick Google search for Sterling Industries CEO brought up a flood of results from the past few hours. His stomach dropped as he clicked on the first link. Sterling Industries CEO saved by heroic employee after cardiac emergency. The article was brief, clinical, mentioning only that Victoria Sterling had suffered a cardiac event during a board meeting and had been assisted by a staff member with medical training before paramedics arrived. But the comments section was already filling up with speculation and questions. More concerning were the photos. Someone, probably security footage, had captured images of the ambulance outside Sterling Industries, of Marcus walking into the building, of the black sedan that had taken him to the hospital. His face was partially obscured, but anyone who knew him would recognize the maintenance uniform, the familiar silhouette. Sophia shuffled into the kitchen in her pajamas, hair sticking up in every direction. "Daddy, why are you up so early?" Marcus closed the laptop quickly. "Just couldn't sleep, mija. Want some cereal?" As he poured Sophia's breakfast and packed her lunch for school, Marcus tried to imagine explaining the job offer to her, tried to picture them moving out of this cramped apartment with its leaky faucets and thin walls into some place with Sophia's own bedroom, maybe even a yard. He thought about health insurance that would cover her asthma medications, without him having to choose between paying for her inhaler and paying the electric bill. But he also thought about the weight of expectation that came with a position like that, the pressure to prove himself worthy of Victoria Sterling's faith, the possibility of failing someone who had already given him more than he'd ever expected to receive. "Daddy," Sophia said around a mouthful of cereal, "you look scared." Marcus blinked, focusing on his daughter's concerned face. "Not scared, sweetheart. Just thinking. About work. About changes," Marcus said carefully. "Sometimes good things happen that are also scary because they're so different from what we're used to." Sophia nodded solemnly. At 7, she was already wise beyond her years, old enough to understand that their life was harder than some people's, but young enough to believe her father could handle anything. After dropping Sophia at school, Marcus found himself walking aimlessly through the city instead of going home to sleep. He ended up at Rittenhouse Square, sitting on a bench and watching the morning joggers and dog walkers, the nannies pushing expensive strollers, the business people heading to offices where they made more in a day than he made in a month. His phone rang. Eleanor Hayes. "Mr. Rivera, good morning. I hope I'm not calling too early." "No, ma'am. I'm awake." "Ms. Sterling wanted me to check in with you, see if you'd had a chance to review the materials she gave you yesterday." Marcus looked around the square at the world of privilege and possibility that surrounded him but had never included him. "I'm still processing it, to be honest." "Of course. It's a big decision. Ms. Sterling wondered if you might be interested in coming to the office today, not as maintenance staff, but as a guest. She'd like to show you what the position would entail, introduce you to some of the people you'd be working with." Yes, I think I'd like that." "Wonderful. Would 11 o'clock work for you?" At 10:55 a.m., Marcus stood in front of Sterling Industries wearing the only dress shirt he owned, a white Oxford he'd bought for Sophia's school awards ceremony, and a pair of khakis he'd found at Goodwill. He felt underdressed and out of place, but Eleanor Hayes greeted him at the executive elevator as if he were visiting royalty. "Ms. Sterling is feeling much better today," Eleanor said as they rode up to the 45th floor. "The doctors are amazed at how quickly she's recovering. They credit the immediate CPR with preventing any lasting damage." The executive floor looked different in daylight, less intimidating, somehow more human. Eleanor led him to a conference room with floor-to-ceiling windows, offering a breathtaking view of the city. Victoria Sterling entered a few minutes later, walking slowly but steadily. She wore a simple navy suit and moved with the careful deliberation of someone still recovering, but her eyes were bright and alert. "Marcus, thank you for coming. Please sit down." For the next hour, Victoria outlined her vision for the Employee Safety and Wellness Program. It wasn't just about emergency response, though that was a crucial component. She wanted to create a comprehensive system that addressed everything from workplace injuries to mental health resources, from basic first aid training to crisis intervention protocols. "Right now," Victoria explained, "we have 15,000 employees across 12 facilities. If even 1% of them faces a medical emergency in any given year, that's 150 people who might need immediate help. Yesterday proved that having the right person in the right place at the right time can literally mean the difference between life and death." She pulled up a presentation on the conference room's smart screen, showing statistics about workplace accidents, response times, survival rates for various medical emergencies. The position would require travel to all our facilities, working with local emergency services, developing training programs. You'd have a team of 3 assistants and a substantial budget for equipment and training materials. Marcus listened, absorbing the scope of what she was describing. It was overwhelming and exciting and terrifying all at once. "What about my daughter?" he asked. "The travel component. Sophia's only 7. I can't leave her alone." Victoria smiled. I was hoping you'd ask about that. The position comes with what we call a family support package. Childcare assistance, flexible scheduling, and when travel is necessary for more than a day, we cover bringing family members along or arranging for appropriate care. She handed him another folder. These are testimonials from other single parents in executive positions here at Sterling. I've learned that supporting our employees' families isn't just the right thing to do. It's good business. The testimonials were from people Marcus had never heard of, but whose situations felt familiar. A single mother who'd been promoted to regional manager and talked about how the company's childcare policies had made it possible for her to accept increased responsibilities. A father whose son had special needs and praised Sterling Industries for providing the flexibility he needed to balance work and family. I also wanted to introduce you to someone, Victoria said, walking to the conference room door. Dr. Sarah Martinez, our chief medical officer. The woman who entered was perhaps 45, with kind eyes and graying hair pulled back in a practical ponytail. She wore a white coat over business attire and moved with the confident efficiency Marcus recognized in medical professionals. Marcus, Dr. Martinez said, extending her hand, Victoria has told me what you did yesterday. I've reviewed the security footage, and your response was textbook perfect. Better than textbook, actually. You improvise solutions that most civilian responders wouldn't have thought of. Marcus shook her hand, noting the firm grip and direct eye contact. I just did what I was trained to do. That training saved Victoria's life, but it also revealed something important about your judgment under pressure. Victoria's cardiac episode was complicated by a condition that made standard CPR less effective. The way you positioned her, the timing of your compressions, you instinctively adapted the protocol to the specific situation. That's not just training, that's clinical intuition. Dr. Martinez sat down across from him. I've been advocating for an expanded workplace safety program for years, having someone with your background leading that initiative. It could revolutionize how we think about employee welfare across all our facilities. If you're hooked on this story, make sure to subscribe and turn on notifications so you never miss an upload. Your support means everything and helps me bring you more emotional stories like this one. After Dr. Martinez left, Victoria and Marcus sat in comfortable silence for a few minutes, both looking out at the city below. Can I ask you something? Marcus said eventually. Of course. Why me? I mean, really. You could hire someone with an MBA, someone who understands corporate culture, someone who fits in with... He gestured around the elegant conference room. Victoria was quiet for a moment. Can I tell you about my father? Marcus nodded. He built this company from nothing. Literally nothing. He was a pharmacist who developed a better treatment for childhood asthma in our garage when I was 12. He started Sterling Industries with a $5,000 loan and a belief that medicine should help people first, make money second. She stood and walked to the window. When I took over the company 20 years ago, I told myself I was honoring his vision. But somewhere along the way, I lost sight of the help people first part. I got so focused on quarterly reports and market share and investor relations that I forgot what we were actually here for. Victoria turned back to face him. Yesterday, when I was lying on that conference table, you didn't see a CEO or a billionaire or someone who could help your career. You saw a person who needed help and you gave it without hesitation. That's the kind of thinking I want to bring back to this company. Marcus felt something shift in his chest. Not the scared fluttering he'd been carrying around, but something warmer, more solid. Purpose. There's something else, Victoria continued. I've been doing some research into your military service. I made some calls to people I know at the Pentagon. Marcus stiffened, He'd never talked about his time in Afghanistan with anyone except the VA counselor he'd seen for 6 months after coming home. Your commanding officer had only good things to say about you. He mentioned that you saved dozens of lives during your deployments, that you volunteered for the most dangerous missions because you couldn't stand the thought of not being there when someone needed help. Marcus looked down at his hands. I also lost people, good people, people who trusted me to... Marcus, Victoria's voice was gentle but firm. In war, good people die despite everyone's best efforts. That's the tragedy of war, not a failure of yours. What matters is that you never stopped trying to save the ones you could. They talked for another hour about the specifics of the position, reporting structure, timeline for implementation, expectations, and goals. By the time Eleanor knocked on the conference room door to remind Victoria of her next appointment, Marcus felt like he understood not just what the job would entail, but why it mattered. I have one request, Marcus said as they prepared to leave. Name it. I want to start by spending time with the maintenance staff, the security guards, the cafeteria workers, the people who know this building and these employees better than anyone. Any safety program that doesn't start with their input is going to fail. Victoria smiled, the first genuinely delighted expression he'd seen from her. That's exactly what I was hoping you'd say. As Marcus rode the elevator down from the executive floor, he thought about the conversation he'd need to have with Sophia that evening. About the life they could build if he was brave enough to take this chance. About the difference he could make for families like his own. His phone buzzed with a text from Sophia's teacher. Sophia told the class her daddy is a hero who saved someone's life. She's very proud. We all are. Marcus smiled, pocketing the phone. Maybe it was time he started believing it himself. That evening, Marcus cooked Sophia's favorite meal, spaghetti with butter and parmesan, while she sat at their small kitchen table working on homework. The folder from Victoria Sterling lay open beside her math worksheets, though Sophia was too absorbed in long division to pay attention to the adult paperwork. Mija, Marcus said, setting her plate in front of her, I need to talk to you about something important. Sophia looked up, immediately alert. In their house, something important usually meant bad news, a lost job, an unexpected bill, a change in their carefully balanced routine. Am I in trouble? She asked. No, sweetheart, nothing like that. Actually, it might be good news, but it would mean some big changes for us. Marcus explained about the job offer in terms a 7-year-old could understand. How he might start working during the day instead of at night. How they might be able to move to a bigger apartment. How he might travel sometimes, but they'd make sure she was always taken care of. Sophia listened with the serious concentration she usually reserved for her favorite books. When Marcus finished, she was quiet for a long time, twirling spaghetti around her fork. Would you be happy? She asked finally. The question caught Marcus off guard. He'd been so focused on the practical implications, the money, the security, the opportunities for Sophia, that he hadn't considered his own happiness. I think I would, he said slowly. It would be challenging, but it would also be a chance to help people, like I helped the lady yesterday. Sophia nodded sagely. Then we should do it. You always tell me that being scared of something doesn't mean you shouldn't try it. Marcus reached across the table and squeezed his daughter's hand. When did you get so wise? I learned it from you, Daddy. That night, after Sophia had fallen asleep, Marcus sat at his laptop and began typing an email to Victoria Sterling. The words came slowly at first, then faster as he found his voice. Ms. Sterling, after careful consideration and a very important consultation with my daughter, I would be honored to accept the position of Head of Employee Safety and Wellness. I believe strongly in your vision for a company that puts people first. and I'm excited about the opportunity to help make that vision a reality. I do have one additional request. I'd like to start immediately, not in the executive role, but by spending my first week working alongside the current maintenance staff, security team, and other frontline employees. I want to understand their concerns and insights before we begin developing any new protocols. I also want to be transparent about something. I've never held a position like this before. I'll make mistakes and I'll need guidance and patience as I learn. But I promise you that I'll approach every day with the same commitment I showed in that boardroom, putting people first, acting with integrity, and never giving up when someone needs help. Thank you for seeing potential in me that I'm only beginning to see in myself. Thank you for giving Sophia and me a chance at a different kind of life. And thank you for trusting me with something so important. With gratitude and determination, Marcus Rivera. He hit send before he could second-guess himself, then closed the laptop and looked around the small apartment that had been home for the past 5 years. In a few weeks, they might be packing up these rooms, saying goodbye to Mrs. Chen and the corner store, where Sophia bought candy with her allowance, and the bus route that had carried Marcus to work every night. Change was coming, whether he was ready or not. But for the first time in years, Marcus felt like he was moving towards something instead of just surviving from one day to the next. His phone buzzed, an email notification. Victoria Sterling had replied already, even though it was nearly midnight. Marcus, your request to start with the frontline staff tells me everything I need to know about the kind of leader you'll be. That's exactly the right instinct. You're wrong about one thing, though. You're not accepting this position in spite of having no executive experience. You're accepting it because you have something more valuable. Wisdom earned through service, compassion proven under pressure, and the perspective of someone who's lived the reality that most people in my position never see. I have a feeling you're going to teach me as much as I teach you. Welcome to Sterling Industries, Marcus. Welcome to the team. Victoria P.S. Please tell Sophia that she has excellent judgment. Her father is indeed a hero. Marcus read the email twice, then set the phone aside and allowed himself a moment to simply sit with the magnitude of what was happening. Tomorrow he'd call in to tell Tom Hendricks that he wouldn't be finishing out his 2 weeks' notice as a maintenance worker. Tomorrow he'd start learning how to be the kind of person Victoria Sterling believed he could become. Tonight, he was still Marcus Rivera, single father and night shift janitor, sitting in a cramped apartment and wondering how his life had changed so completely in the span of 24 hours. But as he looked toward Sophia's bedroom door, listening to his daughter's peaceful breathing, Marcus felt something he hadn't experienced in years, hope for a future that was bigger than just getting by, day by day. For the first time since coming home from Afghanistan, Marcus Rivera allowed himself to believe that maybe, just maybe, his best days weren't behind him after all. 6 weeks into his new position, Marcus Rivera was discovering that saving someone's life had been the easy part. He sat in his new office, still couldn't quite believe he had an office, staring at the email that had arrived an hour ago from Sterling Industries Board of Directors. The subject line was stark and unforgiving: Emergency Review Employee Safety Initiative. The email itself was worse: a formal notification that the board would be conducting an expedited assessment of the employee safety and wellness program with particular focus on cost-benefit analysis and return on investment. Translation: they wanted to shut him down. Marcus's phone buzzed. Eleanor Hayes. Marcus, Victoria needs to see you in her office immediately. And? She paused, her usual composed demeanor cracking slightly. You might want to bring any documentation you have about the safety program. Everything. The walk to Victoria's office felt like a death march. In the 6 weeks since he'd started, Marcus had thrown himself into the work with the same intensity he'd once brought to battlefield medicine. He'd visited all 12 Sterling facilities, interviewed hundreds of employees, and developed comprehensive emergency response protocols that were already saving lives. Just last week, a security guard at their Baltimore facility had used Marcus's training to help a diabetic employee through a severe hypoglycemic episode. 2 days ago, a receptionist in Chicago had recognized the signs of stroke in a visiting client and gotten him to the hospital within the critical treatment window, but none of that seemed to matter to the board. Victoria's office door was closed when he arrived, voices audible through the thick wood. Eleanor gestured for him to wait, her expression sympathetic but worried. "How bad is it?" Marcus asked quietly. Eleanor glanced around, then leaned closer. "There's been some pushback from certain board members about the expense of the program, and some questions about your qualifications." The door opened before Marcus could respond. Victoria emerged, followed by 3 men in identical dark suits. Marcus recognized one of them, James Morton, the CFO who'd been in the boardroom the day of Victoria's cardiac arrest, the man who'd wanted security to remove Marcus instead of letting him help. Morton's eyes flickered over Marcus with barely concealed disdain. "Ms. Sterling, we'll need those cost projections by Friday. The board expects a full accounting of where this experiment is headed." "You'll have them," Victoria replied, her voice carefully controlled. After the men left, Victoria invited Marcus into her office. She looked tired, older somehow, with new lines around her eyes that hadn't been there 6 weeks ago. "Tell me honestly," she said without preamble, "how do you think the program is going?" Marcus pulled out his tablet, scrolling through the data he'd been compiling. "We've had 17 medical emergencies across all facilities since I started. 14 of them were handled successfully by trained employees before emergency services arrived. 3 people are alive today who wouldn't be if we hadn't implemented the training." Victoria nodded. "The Baltimore incident, Chicago. What was the third one?" "Right here, last Tuesday. Sarah Martinez had an allergic reaction during a meeting. Her assistant recognized anaphylaxis and administered the EpiPen from the emergency kit we installed on every floor. Paramedics said another 5 minutes, and she could have died." "I know about Sarah," Victoria said quietly. "She's the one who told me about the board's concerns." Marcus felt his stomach drop. "Dr. Martinez is opposed to the program?" "No, Marcus, she supports it completely, but her near-death experience has some board members worried about liability. They're asking whether training employees to handle medical emergencies opens the company up to lawsuits if something goes wrong." Marcus stared at her. "You mean they'd rather let people die than risk getting sued for trying to save them?" Victoria's expression was grim. "Some of them, yes. James Morton in particular has been very vocal about what he calls scope creep, the idea that we're taking on responsibilities that should belong to trained medical professionals." "But we are trained," Marcus protested. "Every person in the program gets 40 hours of instruction. We're not asking people to perform surgery. We're teaching them to recognize emergencies and respond appropriately until help arrives." "I know that. You know that. The problem is convincing a room full of lawyers and accountants who see every initiative in terms of risk management." Victoria walked to her window, looking down at the city below. "There's something else. Morton's been asking questions about your background, your military service, your qualifications, why I hired you without going through normal HR channels." Marcus felt heat rise in his chest. "Is he questioning my competence?" "He's questioning my judgment in hiring you, and he's not alone." Victoria turned back to face him. 3 other board members have expressed concerns about what they call the optics of promoting a janitor to an executive position. The words hit Marcus like a physical blow. After 6 weeks of 12-hour days, of pouring everything he had into building something meaningful, they still saw him as just a janitor who'd gotten lucky. "I see," he said quietly. "Marcus, I want you to understand something. This isn't about your performance. The program is working exactly as we hoped it would. This is about power and fear and people who are uncomfortable with change that doesn't come through traditional channels." "What are you saying?" Victoria sat down heavily in her chair. "The board is demanding a formal review. They want an outside consulting firm to evaluate the program's effectiveness, cost structure, and legal implications. The process will take at least 6 months. And in the meantime? In the meantime, the program is suspended. No new training, no new equipment purchases, no expansion to additional facilities." Marcus felt the room tilt slightly. For 6 months. At minimum. And after that, if the consultants decide the program isn't worth the risk. Victoria met his eyes. "Then we discontinue it." Marcus stood up abruptly, pacing to the window. Below them, Philadelphia hummed with life, millions of people going about their daily routines, most of them unaware that the difference between life and death often came down to whether the right person was in the right place at the right time. "What about the people we could save in those 6 months?" he asked. "Marcus, no, I'm serious. What about the next person who has a heart attack in a conference room? The next diabetic episode? The next allergic reaction? What do we tell their families?" "Sorry, but the board was worried about liability." Victoria was quiet for a long moment. "I'm not giving up on this," she said finally, "but I need you to be patient. I need time to build support, to find a way around the opposition." "How much time?" "I don't know." Marcus turned from the window, studying Victoria's face. She looked as frustrated as he felt, but underneath the frustration was something else. Exhaustion, defeat. "They're not just questioning the program," he said suddenly. "They're questioning you, your leadership." Victoria's silence was answer enough. "This is about more than employee safety," Marcus continued. "This is about whether you get to run your own company. The board has significant influence." "The board works for you," Marcus interrupted. "You're the CEO. You own controlling interest in Sterling Industries." "It's not that simple. Corporate governance, shareholder relations, fiduciary responsibility." "Victoria." Marcus used her first name deliberately, something he'd never done before. 6 weeks ago, you told me this company needed to remember that it was supposed to help people first, make money second. What happened to that?" Victoria looked up at him, and for a moment she looked less like a powerful CEO and more like someone who was tired of fighting battles she wasn't sure she could win. "What would you have me do, Marcus? Force through an unpopular initiative and risk a board revolt? Potentially lose my position and any chance of implementing change in the future? I'd have you remember why you hired me in the first place, not because I look good on paper or because I have the right credentials, but because I was willing to act when everyone else was frozen in place." Marcus sat back down, leaning forward intently. "You saved my life by giving me this opportunity. You saved Sophia's life by giving her a future I never could have provided on my own. But this program, this isn't about saving me. It's about saving people like my daughter's teacher who had a seizure last month, or the maintenance worker in Baltimore whose quick thinking prevented a warehouse accident from becoming a tragedy." Victoria was quiet, listening. "I know what it's like to lose someone because help didn't come fast enough," Marcus continued. "I know what it's like to live with that guilt, and I know what it's like to save someone and realize that this moment where you make the choice to act, this is what we're here for." He stood up again, but this time his movement was decisive rather than agitated. So here's what I'm going to do. I'm going to the board meeting on Friday. I'm going to present them with every life saved, every emergency averted, every family that didn't have to get a phone call saying their loved one died at work. And I'm going to ask them a simple question. What's the cost of a human life? Victoria shook her head. Marcus, they'll crucify you. Morton and his allies. They'll tear apart everything about your background, your qualifications, your right to even be in that room. Let them. Marcus's voice was calm, steady. I've been torn apart before. I've survived worse than a boardroom full of scared executives. He walked to the door, then paused. You asked me once why I saved your life. I told you it was because of Sophia, because I'd want someone to help her. But that wasn't the whole truth. Victoria looked up at him. I saved you because in that moment you weren't a billionaire CEO. You were just a person who needed help. And that's all any of us really are when everything else gets stripped away. Just people who sometimes need help and sometimes can provide it. Marcus opened the door. The board meeting is Friday at 2 o'clock. I'll be there. Marcus, wait. But he was already gone, leaving Victoria alone in her office with a decision that would define not just the future of the employee safety program, but the kind of leader she wanted to be. Friday arrived gray and rainy, the kind of weather that made Philadelphia look as somber as Marcus felt. He stood outside the Sterling Industries building at 1:45 p.m., wearing the one good suit he'd bought with his first executive paycheck. Sophia had helped him pick out the tie, a subtle blue that she said matched his eyes. Daddy, she'd said that morning as he'd gotten ready, are you nervous? A little, he'd admitted, but you're still going to help people, right? I'm going to try, mija. She'd hugged him extra tight before school. I'm proud of you no matter what happens. Now, standing in the marble lobby of Sterling Industries, Marcus felt the weight of every person who was counting on him. The security guard in Baltimore who'd asked when the advanced training modules would be available. The receptionist in Chicago who'd written to thank him for teaching her how to recognize a stroke. The hundreds of employees across 12 facilities who'd embraced the safety program because they finally felt like their company cared about their well-being. Eleanor Hayes met him at the executive elevator. Victoria asked me to give you this, she said, handing him a thick folder. Inside were letters, dozens of them, from employees across all the Sterling facilities. Personal stories of how the safety training had made a difference in their lives, their confidence, their sense of security at work. Marcus flipped through them quickly, recognizing names and faces from his visits to the various facilities. A maintenance worker whose wife had choked at home, and he'd been able to help her because of the first aid training. A manager who'd used CPR to save a jogger in the park. A receptionist who'd identified signs of domestic abuse in a coworker and connected her with resources. Victoria's been collecting these for weeks, Eleanor said quietly. She wanted you to know you're not going into that room alone. The boardroom was the same one where Marcus had first saved Victoria's life, though the energy was completely different now. 15 people sat around the polished table, 12 board members, Victoria, Dr. Martinez, and one empty chair that Marcus realized was meant for him. James Morton looked up as Marcus entered, his expression skeptical. Mr. Rivera, thank you for joining us. Marcus took his seat, setting the folder of letters on the table in front of him. Around the room he could feel the weight of scrutiny, the assessment of people trying to decide whether he belonged in this space. Before we begin, Morton continued, I want to establish some ground rules for this discussion. We're here to evaluate a company initiative based on fiscal responsibility and risk management. This isn't about personalities or individual achievements. With respect, Mr. Morton, Marcus said quietly, this is entirely about individual achievements. It's about individual lives saved and individual families who didn't have to plan funerals. Morton's jaw tightened. Mr. Rivera, while we all appreciate your enthusiasm for this program, the board has concerns about the financial and legal implications of expanding company liability into areas traditionally handled by emergency services. What's the current cost of the program? Marcus asked. Morton consulted his papers. Initial implementation was $2.3 million. Ongoing costs are projected at $800,000 annually. And what's the cost of a wrongful death lawsuit? The question hung in the air. Morton shifted uncomfortably. That's not really the point. It's exactly the point, Marcus interrupted, because I've done the research. The average wrongful death settlement in workplace incidents is $4.2 million. We've already prevented 3 deaths that I can document. That's $12.6 million in potential liability prevented, for a total program cost of $3.1 million. He opened the folder and pulled out the first letter. But let's talk about something more important than money. This is from Maria Santos, a receptionist at our Newark facility. Last month, she recognized the signs of a heart attack in a visiting client and called 911 while starting CPR. The paramedics said her actions saved his life. Marcus looked around the table, making eye contact with each board member. The client was a 54-year-old father of 3. His name is David Chen. He's a high school teacher. After he recovered, he wrote to thank Maria and to tell her that he was able to walk his daughter down the aisle at her wedding last weekend because of what she did. He pulled out another letter. This is from Robert Kim, security supervisor in Baltimore. He used his diabetes emergency training to help a co-worker who was experiencing severe hypoglycemia. The man's blood sugar was critically low. Without intervention, he could have gone into a coma, or worse. Marcus continued letter by letter, story by story. Each one was a real person, a real emergency, a real life saved or tragedy prevented. With each letter, he could see the mood in the room shifting. Some board members were taking notes, others were leaning forward, listening more intently. These aren't statistics, Marcus said finally. These are your employees, people who come to work every day to help build this company, who trust you to provide a safe environment, who deserve to know that if something goes wrong, the person next to them has the knowledge and tools to help. Dr. Martinez spoke up. If I may add something, Marcus's program saved my life 3 weeks ago. My assistant, trained through this initiative, recognized anaphylaxis and administered an EpiPen that prevented what could have been fatal respiratory failure. I'm sitting here today because of this program. Morton shifted uncomfortably. Dr. Martinez, we're certainly grateful for your recovery, but we have to consider the larger picture. What if an employee makes a mistake? What if someone is injured during an attempted rescue? What if we're sued because an untrained person tried to help and made things worse? Marcus leaned forward. Mr. Morton, what if we're sued because a trained person was available to help and we prevented them from doing so? What if someone dies because we were more afraid of liability than committed to saving lives? He stood up, his voice carrying the quiet authority he'd learned in the Army. 6 weeks ago, I was a janitor. You all saw me as invisible, irrelevant, someone whose opinion didn't matter. But when Victoria needed help, my background didn't matter. My job title didn't matter. The only thing that mattered was whether I was willing to act. Marcus gestured around the room. Everyone in this room has the power to save lives, not just through the medications Sterling Industries produces, but through the decisions you make right here, right now. You can choose to see employees as potential liabilities, or you can choose to see them as human beings worth protecting. He picked up the folder of letters. These people aren't asking for anything unreasonable. They're not demanding raises or better benefits or more vacation time. They're asking for the knowledge and tools to help each other when it matters most. They're asking for the chance to be heroes when someone needs saving. The room was silent. Marcus could hear the rain against the windows, the distant hum of the building's ventilation system, the soft scratch of pens on paper as board members took notes. Victoria spoke for the first time since the meeting had begun. "I want to share something with all of you. When I had my cardiac arrest 6 weeks ago, there were 11 people in this room. 11 intelligent, accomplished individuals who have the authority to make decisions affecting thousands of lives. And when I needed help, not one of them knew what to do." She looked around the table, her gaze steady. "That's not their fault. They weren't trained. They weren't prepared. They were just as helpless as I would be if someone asked me to perform surgery or argue a court case or engineer a bridge. But Marcus was prepared, and because of his preparation, I'm alive." Victoria stood, walking to the windows that overlooked the city. This company was founded on the principle that medicine should help people first, make money second. Somewhere along the way, we've reversed that priority. We've become so focused on protecting our profits that we've forgotten our responsibility to protect our people. She turned back to the board. "I'm not asking you to approve this program because it's profitable, though it is. I'm asking you to approve it because it's right. Because every person who works for Sterling Industries deserves to know that if something goes wrong, we've done everything possible to prepare the people around them to help." Morton cleared his throat. "Ms. Sterling, with all due respect, emotion isn't a sound basis for corporate policy. We have fiduciary responsibilities to our shareholders." "Our shareholders include our employees," Victoria interrupted, "many of whom participate in our stock purchase program. Are you saying their lives matter less than our liability concerns?" "That's not what I'm saying at all." "Then what are you saying, James?" Marcus watched the exchange with interest. This wasn't just about the safety program anymore. This was about what kind of company Sterling Industries wanted to be, and who had the authority to make that decision. Morton straightened his papers, clearly uncomfortable with the direction of the conversation. "I'm saying that we need to be prudent, that we can't let good intentions override sound business judgment. And I'm saying," Marcus interrupted quietly, "that the best business judgment is to invest in the people who make your business possible." He pulled out his phone and opened a photo, Sophia grinning at the camera in her school uniform. "This is my daughter, Sophia. She's 7 years old. Every morning when I come to work, I know that I'm building something that will help keep her safe, not just financially, but physically, because someday she might be the person who needs help, or she might be the person who can provide it." Marcus looked around the room. Every person in this building is someone's daughter or son, someone's parent or spouse or friend. The question isn't whether we can afford to implement this program. The question is whether we can afford not to. The vote, when it came, was closer than Marcus had expected, but decisive enough to matter. 8 board members voted to continue the Employee Safety and Wellness Program. 4 voted to suspend it. James Morton was not among the 8. After the meeting, as board members filed out with handshakes and congratulations, Victoria approached Marcus with a smile that reached her eyes for the first time in weeks. "Thank you," she said simply. "For what?" "For reminding me who I wanted to be when I grew up." Marcus laughed. "I thought you already were grown up." "Apparently, not quite yet." As they walked out of the boardroom together, Marcus thought about the long road ahead, expanding the program to new facilities, training hundreds more employees, building partnerships with emergency services across 12 cities. It would be challenging, sometimes frustrating, occasionally heartbreaking when they couldn't save everyone. But it would also be worth it. Every time someone like Maria Santos or Robert Kim or Dr. Martinez's assistant stepped up to help a colleague in need, every time a life was saved because the right person had the right training at the right moment, it would all be worth it. Marcus's phone buzzed. A text from Sophia. "How did it go, Daddy?" He typed back, "We won, mija. We get to keep helping people." Her response came immediately. "I knew you would. You're the best helper in the world." Marcus smiled, pocketing the phone. Maybe he was still learning how to be an executive, how to navigate boardrooms and corporate politics and quarterly reports. But Sophia was right about one thing. He was pretty good at helping people, and in the end, that was really all that mattered. Thank you so much for watching until the end. If you loved this story, check out the other videos on your screen now. I think you'll really enjoy them. And don't forget to subscribe if you haven't already. See you in the next story.